It smelled too quiet. That's the only way I can describe it. A farm like mine is supposed to have layers of sound, goats bleating for breakfast, the distant cluck of hens, maybe a curious pony snorting at the gate. But when I stepped out of my pickup after returning from a 2-day agriculture summit in D.C., the air was dead still. No sounds, no smells, no animals, just eerie silence and the faint scent of bleach. My boots crunched across the gravel as I hurried toward the main barn, a sinking feeling clawing at my gut. That's when I saw the first sign something was terribly wrong. The heavy lock on the barn door had been cut clean off, and a wrinkled notice fluttered in the breeze, duct taped to the frame. The heading read, HOA Livability Compliance Enforcement, Final Notice of Removal. I didn't even need to read the rest. I knew. I ripped it down and pushed through the door, scanning the empty stalls, the bare feed buckets, and the absence of warmth where my animals had always waited. My wife stumbled out of the house in her slippers, mascara streaked and red-eyed. She didn't say a word, just held out her phone with shaking hands. The screen displayed an email thread from the HOA president, Karenita Sloan, and an attached report from some private contractor named Rural Habitat Solutions. According to them, my animals had been declared unauthorized, forcibly removed, and, my hands trembled as I read it, euthanized for community health and compliance. That's when I collapsed to my knees in the barn, on the very ground where my daughter's rescue lamb Clover had taken her first step. Clover had passed peacefully last year, and we kept that stall as a little memorial. Now it was scorched, trampled, and violated. Just 48 hours. That's all it took. I left for one conference, and in that time, the HOA decided to play God. But what Karenita didn't know, what none of those smug little board members with their clipboards and fake authority realized, was that I wasn't just another farmer with some backyard pets. I'm the director of the State Department of Agriculture. I write the rules they pretended to enforce. 3 weeks earlier, I'd attended the HOA meeting out of courtesy. I'm a quiet man, not one to flash a badge or lead with title. I believed in talking before escalating. But at that meeting, Karenita stood at the podium in her pastel pink blazer and matching claws and declared that our community needed to be elevated by removing what she called rural nuisances. She meant animals. She meant my animals. She'd been complaining for months about the smell of manure, even though she lived 4 streets away and never set foot near our property. She'd whipped the HOA into a frenzy, painting the image of disease, noise, and lowered property values. The irony, of course, is that my farm predated the HOA by nearly 2 decades. I tried to explain it calmly. You're outside your jurisdiction. My property is zoned agricultural and has exemptions under state statute. I even handed her the paperwork. She looked at it like I'd just dropped roadkill on her clipboard. We voted, she said. This community has spoken. That vote, as it turned out, was split 3-2. The deciding vote was cast by her husband, Franklin Sloan, who, as I later discovered, didn't even live in our neighborhood full-time. The bylaws were murky at best, and it was clear they were playing a dangerous game of overreach. I warned them, told them removing animals from private property could constitute theft, cruelty, and a direct violation of state AG code. She smirked. Then sue us, she said. I didn't sue. Not right away. I filed an internal review instead, hoping to resolve it diplomatically. I dealt with dozens of overreaching HOAs during my tenure, and most of them folded once the state came knocking. But this time, while I was away, they struck first. And they didn't just remove them. They didn't call animal control. They didn't involve a vet certified by the state. They used a private firm, essentially hired thugs with livestock trailers and euthanasia drugs. And now every goat, every chicken, every rescued animal my family had lovingly raised was gone. The HOA's excuse came in the form of a 1-page justification email. It referenced a pest abatement mandate from 2004, one that had been repealed nearly a decade ago. It claimed my animals were unvaccinated, which was laughable considering I personally signed off on the very health inspection protocols they were quoting. It was a paper-thin justification. But it didn't matter. The animals were dead. My neighbor Dave, a Vietnam vet who ran a small greenhouse operation, came over that evening with a bottle of bourbon and fury in his eyes. "They're doing it to all of us," he said. "Tried fining me for rain barrels. Said my compost pile was attracting rodents. You know how many rats I've seen? None. 0. But they're using that to crack down." He handed me a photo, taken from his security camera. It showed a white unmarked truck parked outside my barn 2 nights earlier. Men in plain clothes. Masked. They weren't professionals. They were there to erase, not relocate. That night, I stood in my field under a sky thick with stars and stared at the empty pens. My daughter came out, holding Clover's old ribbon in her hand, and asked the question that shattered me completely. Did they think animals don't have feelings? I didn't have an answer. I had rage. I had proof. I had power. And now I had a mission. If the HOA thought they could pull this off quietly, sweep the blood under the dirt, wave it off as policy, they were in for the rudest awakening in community association history. I wasn't going to sue. I was going to end them. The next morning, I was at my desk before the sun even rose, documents spread out like a war map. My badge sat beside my coffee mug, a cold metal reminder of the authority I rarely had to flex, until now. I pulled every record I had on the HOA's operations, starting with the supposed pest abatement order they cited. It didn't take more than 5 minutes to find the original order. It had been issued in 2004 in response to a small-scale poultry mite infestation in a completely different county and had officially been repealed in 2013. The document the HOA used was clearly doctored. The header was correct, but the font was wrong. The signature block was missing the official seal. They hadn't even tried to make it look legit. Someone had cobbled it together to sound threatening, hoping no one would question it. I printed out the real version and stapled it to their fake one, side by side. Then I opened the file labeled Rural Habitat Solutions. This was the contractor they'd used to remove and euthanize the animals. No state license. No vet registration. Not even a working phone number. Just a P.O. box and a Gmail address. I sent a request to our state licensing division for background on the group, and within the hour, one of my deputies confirmed it was a shell company registered under the name of a man who had been cited 3 times for illegal animal transportation. His last business, a sketchy wildlife relocation firm, had been shut down after a sting caught him dumping captured raccoons into an abandoned lot outside the city. It was all unraveling faster than I expected. The HOA had essentially hired an outlaw to do their dirty work. The question was, did they know who he was? Or did they just not care? Either way, it made their negligence even more damning. And it gave me everything I needed to proceed. That afternoon, I made a call to the state attorney general's liaison. By sunset, we had opened an official inquiry. Not just into the HOA, but into Rural Habitat Solutions, Corenita Sloan, and anyone who had approved the use of force against private property without legal cause. But I wasn't going to stop at a paper trail. I needed to confront them face to face. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. According to the agenda, they planned to discuss upcoming landscaping improvements and a long-term community rebranding initiative. Nowhere did it mention the slaughter they had authorized, or the dozens of complaints that were already flooding in from other residents who feared they'd be next. I didn't RSVP. I didn't email ahead. I just showed up. I walked in halfway through Corenita's speech about transforming the visual identity of our community. She was standing at a podium decorated with hydrangeas, rambling on about color palettes and modern fencing aesthetic. Her voice faltered when she saw me step into the room, not because she recognized me as the state agriculture director. She didn't even know my last name, but because I wasn't alone. I was flanked by Deputy Simmons, in full uniform, and an agriculture enforcement officer who rolled in a wheeled cart carrying binders, video stills, and a copy of every state law they had violated. Karenita blinked like someone had just yanked the mic cord out of her brain. The other board members stiffened. A few homeowners actually clapped. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I calmly walked to the front of the room, laid the documents on the table, and introduced myself, not just by title, but by authority. The silence was absolute. Then I spoke the words that would change everything. I am hereby notifying this board that your actions on April 4th constitute unlawful seizure of private agricultural property, execution of unlicensed animal euthanasia, and fraudulent invocation of repealed health ordinances. As of this moment, your compliance authority is under formal state review. Karenita tried to regain control, her voice wobbling with faux indignation. Excuse me, sir, but this is a private meeting of our homeowners association. You don't have permission to disrupt our operations. I cut her off by placing a copy of the fake pest abatement order in front of her. This is a forged document. That's a felony. The contractor you hired has a criminal record and is not licensed for animal control under state law. That's negligence. And every resident in this room is now at legal risk because of your decisions. That's liability. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. The room was still. No one moved. One of the board members quietly got up and walked out. Another lowered his head into his hands. I wasn't done. I turned on a portable monitor and played a clip from Dave's security camera. The unmarked truck, the masked men, the illegal removal. Then I placed a printed euthanasia report on the table. It showed each animal, their method of execution, and a forged authorization signature listed as property manager. That name belonged to Franklin Sloan, Karenita's husband. Deputy Simmons stepped forward and began taking names. A few residents stood up and demanded answers. One man shouted that they'd threatened to fine him for his apiary, which he legally maintained for pollination. Another said they'd removed his daughter's therapy rabbit from the backyard without notice. The HOA had done this before, but never to someone who had the power to fight back. Karenita's final move of the night was to call me a bully. She accused me of bringing state muscle to settle a personal vendetta. I let her rant for a minute before calmly reminding her that state law always supersedes HOA bylaws, and that bringing enforcement officers to a formal inquiry is not intimidation. It's protocol. Then I dropped the final card. The Department of Agriculture is not only filing complaints. We are enacting a Rural Community Protection Review. That means a full investigation of your HOA's operations, authority, financials, and legal legitimacy. Gasps followed. Some cheered. Karenita looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. I walked out to a standing ovation from half the room. The other half stayed behind, some to argue, others to apologize. As I reached the parking lot, Dave was waiting near my truck. He clapped me on the back. 'Bout time someone stuck it to them. I looked up at the night sky, still missing the chorus of my animals, but feeling something else stir in my chest. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice for every quiet farmer who'd been bullied into submission. It was about families. It was about animals who trusted us. And this was just the beginning. It didn't take long for the retaliation to begin. 3 days after the HOA meeting, someone tried to bribe my deputy. His name was Mitch, a quiet guy from my regulatory team, the kind who did his job without ever seeking the spotlight. He'd been following up on some zoning infractions within the community when a woman approached him outside the HOA office with a manila envelope and a rehearsed smile. She claimed to represent a coalition of concerned homeowners who wanted to resolve things peacefully and off the record. Mitch, being the straight shooter he is, kept his body cam running the entire time. The woman offered him $5,000 in cash to relax the report and stop stirring up drama. She even slid a note into the envelope with the line, "Community harmony depends on your silence." When I reviewed the footage, I recognized her immediately, Melinda from the HOA's so-called Livability Committee. She once threatened to report my compost bins for being visually disruptive. I submitted the footage to the Attorney General's office, and they opened a formal bribery investigation. But the deeper we dug, the worse things got. More and more residents began speaking up. One elderly couple had been fined 3 times in 1 month for non-conforming landscape elements, which turned out to be a tomato plant and a rain barrel. Another man was given a violation notice for parking his tractor too close to the property line, despite his land predating the HOA's existence by over 15 years. This wasn't enforcement. This was targeted harassment masquerading as community management. And it had been going on for years. The difference now was that someone was documenting it, and that someone had the full weight of the state behind him. As if trying to bribe an officer wasn't bad enough, the HOA began pushing a narrative. Karenita posted a public statement on the community board, accusing me of launching a personal vendetta. She said my animals had caused excessive damage and stench, and claimed their removal had been tragic but necessary. She even used the word heroic to describe the decision-making of the board, casting them as protectors of community values. Her followers, mostly HOA loyalists who benefited from her favoritism, echoed her sentiments. The post went semi-viral within HOA circles, and a few out-of-state HOA groups began parroting the same nonsense, calling my investigation government overreach. I ignored most of it. My job wasn't to battle public opinion, it was to enforce the law. But then things escalated. One night, around 2 a.m., my security system alerted me to movement in the lower field near the barn. At first, I thought it might be coyotes or a raccoon. But when I reviewed the footage, my blood ran cold. 2 figures in hoodies were pouring liquid near the old hay shed, then lighting it. Flames erupted within seconds. They ran off before I could get a plate number, but the camera got a clear enough shot of their faces. One of them was a maintenance guy who worked under Franklin Sloan. The other I didn't recognize, but he wore an HOA volunteer badge clipped to his belt. The fire department contained the blaze before it spread to the house. But the shed was gone. And with it, the small wooden memorial for Clover, my daughter's rescued lamb. It wasn't just a structure. It was sacred. We'd built it together after Clover passed, painted it white with green trim, and filled it with photos, little flowers, and a hand-carved sign that read, "Forever Safe." It had nothing to do with zoning or bylaws. It wasn't even visible from the street. Burning it was deliberate, personal, a message. My daughter stood beside me the next morning in silence. She didn't cry. She just stared at the scorched ground with her hands clenched so tightly, her knuckles turned white. I knew then that the line had been crossed. This wasn't an administrative dispute anymore. This was war. And I wasn't going to fight it alone. That afternoon, I called a meeting with our legal counsel, enforcement division, and state agricultural zoning office. I outlined everything: the forged documents, the illegal animal removal, the bribery attempt, the community manipulation, and now the arson. I explained the threats to residents, the systemic abuse of power, and the complete erosion of trust within the community. Then I invoked something I hadn't used in over a decade of service: the Rural Community Protection Review. It's an obscure clause buried deep within the State Agricultural Governance Code, created during a time when unchecked suburban sprawl was clashing with traditional farming zones. It grants the state the ability to place an entire HOA under investigation and, if necessary, suspend their authority in areas where agricultural zoning conflicts arise. The clause had only been used twice in state history, and both times it resulted in the dissolution of the HOA's enforcement powers. With the evidence I had, we met every requirement for immediate review. The order was approved within 48 hours. Teams were assembled, subpoenas were drafted, and our department issued a public notice that the HOA's governing powers would be suspended pending investigation. Karenita's response came within the hour. She posted a hysterical rant on the community website, calling it a coup and claiming I was trying to turn the neighborhood into a hippie commune for livestock. She accused the state of bullying, overstepping, and violating homeowner rights. But her words were getting fewer likes and more angry comments with each passing hour. Even her allies were starting to jump ship. The turning point came when one of the board members, a man named Henry Crawford, turned whistleblower. He contacted our department and offered to testify in exchange for immunity. He handed over emails, internal memos, and meeting recordings that proved the HOA had been targeting specific residents with fabricated violations and had been funneling collected fines into a discretionary beautification fund, a fund that, according to the financials, had been used to purchase luxury patio furniture, personal gifts, and, in one case, a spa weekend for Karenita. The web of corruption unraveled quickly after that. With Henry's testimony and our ongoing investigation, the case transformed from a regulatory review into a full-blown criminal probe. The Attorney General's office expanded the scope. IRS involvement was triggered due to improper handling of HOA funds, and local law enforcement began preparing to serve warrants for arrest. Meanwhile, my farm stood quiet but stronger. I reinforced the fence lines, installed new surveillance, and began working on plans to rebuild the memorial. My daughter helped, saying she wanted to paint it blue this time because Clover liked the sky. I promised her we'd make it even better than before. This fight had cost us. It had cost my animals, my peace of mind, and a piece of my daughter's innocence. But it wasn't for nothing. Because in exposing the rot behind the smiling faces of that HOA board, I wasn't just defending my farm. I was defending the rights of every rural homeowner who ever had to battle bureaucracy, bullying, and outright cruelty dressed up as policy. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The state audit team rolled in just before dawn on Monday. 3 white SUVs bearing the seal of the State Agriculture Department parked neatly in front of the HOA office building, which looked more like a converted real estate shack than the nerve center of a suburban dictatorship. The investigators stepped out with clipboards, evidence kits, body cams, and calm expressions that meant business. By 8 a.m., the building was sealed, the employees told to leave their desks, and the board members, those that hadn't gone into hiding, were handed formal notices. Karenita wasn't there. Word had it she was on vacation, at a spa retreat 2 towns over, likely trying to distance herself from the fire she started. That wouldn't save her. The public reaction was explosive. The news broke fast, first on neighborhood forums and then in the local media. A headline blared, "State seizes HOA office amid animal euthanasia scandal." Underneath, a smaller but far more damning subtitle read, "Board accused of bribery, forgery, and illegal seizure of livestock." Within hours, our department's press line was flooded with calls, from residents, from reporters, even from other HOAs asking if they were next. It was clear we'd struck a nerve, and not just locally. This was bigger than my town. The whole state was watching. Inside the HOA office, investigators uncovered exactly what we expected: shredded documents stuffed in trash bags, a burner phone with encrypted texts about handling complaints off-grid, and multiple financial ledgers that didn't match the official reports filed with the county. One of the agents found a USB drive hidden behind a fake electrical outlet, and what was on it confirmed everything. Audio files, internal emails, and recordings of meetings where board members openly discussed ways to cleanse the area of undesirable elements. The audio had Karenita bragging about how easy it was to manipulate zoning laws and shut down hillbilly farm crap by using obscure language in the bylaws. But the most damning thing we found was a recorded call between Karenita and the man who owned Rural Habitat Solutions. It wasn't just about my animals. They had done this before. At least 4 other properties had been targeted with the same fake pest order, and in one instance, they removed a family's goats while the parents were out of town, claiming a roach infestation risk. Karenita laughed in the recording. "People think animals have rights," she said. "Not if they're not registered. Not if they smell." It was over for her the moment that clip got released. By the time she came back from her spa retreat, a swarm of reporters was camped outside her home. She tried to hold a press conference in her driveway, but it was a disaster. Microphones shoved in her face, neighbors shouting from across the street, and a homemade sign hanging from a second-floor window that said, HOA equals horse-killing oppressors. She broke down mid-sentence and stormed back inside. That was the last time she appeared in public without a lawyer beside her. With the HOA board officially suspended, the state temporarily assumed oversight of all HOA functions. We assigned a special administrator to handle basic services like trash pickup and street maintenance, but the enforcement arm, the very core of their authority, was completely dissolved. That meant no more fines, no more late-night compliance checks, and no more power plays disguised as policy. It also meant their bank accounts were frozen. A week later, we held a community forum on my property. I didn't host it in a stuffy town hall or some HOA-owned clubhouse. I hosted it in my field, right next to the rebuilt animal pens, where the breeze still smelled like hay and dirt and healing. We rented a portable stage and set up folding chairs in rows, with a makeshift podium built from 2 sawhorses and an old fence plank. Kids ran around with goats on leashes. Chickens clucked from their new coop. It didn't look like a government proceeding, but it was one of the most powerful gatherings I'd ever been part of. People came from every street in the neighborhood. Even residents who had once been pro-HOA now stood up and shared their stories, how they'd been threatened, fined, silenced. One man admitted he was told to remove a disabled ramp because it didn't match the community aesthetic. A woman said her autistic son's therapy duck was forcibly taken from their backyard and dumped at an animal shelter 3 towns over. Tears were shed. But so was laughter, when someone brought a blow-up doll dressed like Karenita holding a clipboard. They dubbed it KarenBot 3000 and passed it around like a stress ball. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't stand on the stage. I stood on the dirt with everyone else. I didn't ask for this fight, I said. But I'm damn sure going to finish it. What happened to my animals can't be undone. But what we do next, that's up to us. I outlined a new proposal, one that would use part of the dissolved HOA's funds to create a community-run agricultural co-op. No more fines for chickens. No more bans on goats, composting, or greenhouses. Instead, support, resources, shared equipment, a legal framework built on inclusion and sustainability, not petty politics. The crowd applauded. People signed up. Volunteers stepped forward. By the end of the day, the coop had over 50 founding members and a dedicated fund to support families who wanted to start small farm projects. The momentum was real, and it was growing fast. But the final twist came when the state auctioned off the HOA's foreclosed asset. Turns out the office building wasn't paid off. It had been financed through dues and fines, and with those frozen and mismanaged, foreclosure came quick. I put in a bid. A modest one. Nobody outbid me. I bought the building for a fraction of its worth. I didn't want it for revenge. I wanted it as a symbol. We gutted the inside, stripped out the fake plants and motivational posters, and converted it into a supply depot for the co-op. The walls got repainted with murals of animals and open field. The boardroom? We turned it into a feed storage room. The president's office, Karenita's old perch of power, became a public library for agricultural education. I put a goat in the front yard. Named her Liberty. She loves chewing on fake HOA pamphlet. Fitting. The best part? We didn't just win. We replaced the system they broke with something better. Something real. Something rooted in the values they tried to destroy. Justice wasn't just served. It was planted, watered, and bloomed. And it was only going to grow from here. The morning after the community forum, I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee in hand and the sunrise stretching over the newly repaired animal pens. It was the first time in weeks that the farm sounded like home again, roosters crowing in the distance, the soft bleating of young goats echoing off the trees, and the low hum of neighbors chatting as they loaded supplies from the co-op. My daughter skipped across the yard in her boots, trailing behind a tiny goat with a red ribbon around its neck. She'd named him Justice. A bold name for a baby goat, but fitting. She said she picked it because he's loud and stubborn and doesn't let anyone push him around. I laughed when she said that, because truthfully I felt the same way. The community had come alive in ways I never expected. The land that once held tension now held hope. People were planting again, vegetables, flowers, anything that reminded them of growth. Children were asking to help with chores. Elderly residents came out of their homes, not to yell about lawn heights or fence colors, but to lend a hand in restoring what had been lost. The HOA's grip had been broken, and in its place, something better was taking root. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was real. It was ours. Karenita's trial was set to begin the following month. The state charged her with document forgery, illegal seizure of livestock, conspiracy to defraud, and abuse of authority. She was also facing several civil suits from residents who had been targeted by her board's bogus violations. Her attorney tried to argue that she was being made a scapegoat, that she acted in the community's best interest, but no one bought that narrative anymore. Especially not after hearing her voice bragging about how easily she could get animals killed with a fake signature. Public opinion had turned. She had become a walking symbol of entitlement gone wrong, her name mocked on local news and social media alike. There were memes, cartoons, even a short parody song on YouTube called The Chicken Executioner that played to the tune of an old country ballad. But I didn't spend my days thinking about her anymore. The real victory was the freedom we now had, the laughter in my daughter's voice, the way she hugged Justice every morning like he was a gift the universe gave back. I spent my hours helping neighbors build fences, organizing weekend farm skills workshops, and coordinating produce swap. The old HOA building, now the Harvest Our Agriculture Co-op Center, buzzed with activity. We installed shelves stocked with feed, seed, tools, and even educational pamphlets written in plain English, not the legalese the HOA used to weaponize. There were flyers for upcoming composting classes and volunteer sign-ups for weekend barn-raising event. Every corner of that building had been scrubbed of its past. In what used to be the board's conference room, we set up a long wooden table and filled the walls with photos of every resident's animals, past and present. A collage of goats, chickens, bees, rabbits, and even ducks smiled down from the walls. At the center of it, framed in glass, was a photo of Clover, my daughter's lamb, with a handwritten message below it, the spark that started a fire too big to stop. That wall became sacred ground to us, a reminder of what was lost, but also of what was reclaimed. Franklin Sloan tried to slither his way out of accountability by claiming he had no knowledge of the forged documents and that he merely signed what was placed before him. But the evidence was stacked too high. Emails, recordings, and bank statements painted a clear picture. He wasn't just complicit. He was active in targeting residents, approving illegal removals, and pocketing money meant for infrastructure improvements. His desperate public apology rang hollow, especially after we uncovered that he'd used HOA funds to pay for a weekend golf retreat during the week the animals were euthanized. He would never hold a position of authority in the state again. That much was certain. The real poetic justice came at the next local election, when the city council voted to impose strict oversight rules on all HOAs operating near agricultural zones. My testimony before the legislative committee helped draft a new bill, the Agricultural Zoning Protection Act, which effectively stripped HOAs of any power to regulate livestock, gardens, or homesteading practices in pre-zoned areas. It passed with overwhelming support. The state made it law within weeks. Karenita's former supporters, now facing backlash of their own, scrambled to cover their tracks and disbanded the Livability Committee entirely. That phrase was now a running joke. Any time someone made a fuss over something ridiculous, we'd smile and say, "Sounds like a livability violation." One of the last things we did as a community that season was host a Harvest Day celebration. We invited everyone. No HOA, no inspections, no clipboards. Just neighbors, music, food, and the simple joy of being left alone to live. Tables overflowed with homemade jams, baked goods, and fresh eggs. Kids painted pumpkins. Adults shared stories. And when the sun dipped low, we lit lanterns and walked to the rebuilt barn together. My daughter led the way, holding a single white flower in her hand. She placed it at Clover's new memorial, then turned to face the crowd and said, "Thank you for helping us be free." Nobody planned for that moment, but everyone felt it. That kind of truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs people willing to stand, speak, and remember. The night ended with laughter, with people lingering in the dark, hesitant to let go of something so rare and honest. And as I stood under the stars, with justice curled up beside my boots and the co-op building glowing softly in the distance, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not revenge. Not even closure. But peace. A sense that we'd turned pain into purpose. That we'd turned loss into legacy. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of cruelty to expose 100 cracks. And sometimes, all it takes is one goat named Justice to remind people what a community really looks like. That's the story the HOA will never put in a brochure. But it's the one we'll tell forever.